The murmur of polite grief and the clinking of wine glasses felt like sandpaper against my raw nerves. I stood near the edge of the opulent reception room, a solitary figure in a simple black dress amidst the sea of expensive mourning attire. They milled around the lavish buffet, catered naturally by the city's most exclusive service, sharing hushed anecdotes about Michael Ashton, my ex-fiancé, the man whose sudden death 2 weeks ago had somehow necessitated my presence here today. Then the laughter started. Low at first, a shared glance between Michael's perfectly coiffed mother, Beatrice, and his sister Chloe. It spread to his circle of friends, the ones who had always looked through me, the ones who saw me as the temporary, unsuitable girl Michael had bafflingly dated for 4 years before inevitably trading up. Can you believe she actually showed up? Chloe's voice, sharp and carrying despite her attempt at a whisper, sliced through the room's subdued hum. The nerve, after everything. Beatrice patted her daughter's arm, her gaze sweeping over me with cool disdain. Some people lack self-awareness, darling, probably hoping for a mention in the will. More stifled laughter. My cheeks burned, humiliation coiling tight in my stomach. My name is Amelia Reyes, and 5 years ago, I was Michael Ashton's fiancé. 5 years ago, he broke my heart, telling me, with the casual cruelty he'd perfected, that I didn't fit into the life he envisioned, a life of corporate mergers, country club memberships, and dynastic expectations. Now, standing in this room filled with the very people who embodied that life, being openly mocked at his funeral reception, I felt a familiar wave of inadequacy threaten to pull me under. Why had I even come? Obligation? A misplaced sense of closure? Or maybe, deep down, a stubborn refusal to let them erase the 4 years I had dedicated to a man who ultimately saw me as disposable. I kept my expression carefully neutral, fixing my gaze on a ridiculously large floral arrangement, breathing slowly, willing the floor not to swallow me whole. This was their world, the one I never truly belonged to, the one they were reminding me, even in grief, that I was still an outsider. Leaving Michael hadn't been a clean break. It felt more like an amputation performed without anesthetic. The breakup conversation happened in the meticulously decorated living room of the apartment we shared, though only his name was on the lease, a detail his mother had insisted upon. "It's just not working, Amelia," he'd said, avoiding my eyes, fiddling with the cufflink I'd saved for months to buy him. "We want different things." It was the classic, cowardly excuse, devoid of specifics, designed to minimize his guilt. I pressed him, needing something more tangible than vague dissatisfaction after 4 years of shared dreams, postponed ambitions, mine, mostly, and unwavering support for his burgeoning career at his father's investment firm. Finally, he admitted it, the words tumbling out with impatient relief. "Look, my parents feel, we all feel, that you're wonderful, really, but perhaps not suited for the demands of the life I'm moving towards. You're an artist, Amelia. Your focus is different." He gestured vaguely around the room, at the comfortable life largely funded by his family trust, a life I'd tried so hard to fit into, hosting his colleagues, charming his parents, muting my own aspirations. My different focus, my passion for sculpting, the small commissions I took to build my portfolio while working part-time at a gallery, was suddenly redefined as a liability, an indicator that I wasn't suitable. The implication hung heavy in the air. I wasn't wealthy enough, connected enough, ambitious enough in the right ways. I wasn't enough. The aftermath was brutal. I moved out of the apartment we shared, leaving behind the furniture I'd helped choose and the future I'd mistakenly believed was ours. My savings were meager. I'd poured most of my energy and limited funds into supporting Michael's career, assuming our success would be shared. Now I was adrift, couch surfing between my few city friends, patching together freelance graphic design gigs alongside my gallery job, just to make rent on a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood Michael wouldn't have driven through, let alone lived in. The sense of isolation was profound. My own family was scattered, my parents gone years ago. My support network gradually eroded during my relationship with Michael as I prioritized his social circle over my own, felt thin and distant. Calls to Michael went unanswered after the first week. Messages were left unread. He had moved on, surgically excising me from his life with the same precision he applied to financial spreadsheets. Beatrice and Chloe, who had once feigned warmth, now treated me with icy indifference when our paths occasionally crossed at gallery openings I worked. The humiliation lingered, a constant dull ache beneath the surface. I'd see photos of Michael on social media, attending galas with impossibly polished women, vacationing in St. Bart's, closing deals, each image a painful reminder of the life I wasn't suited for. I threw myself into my sculpting, pouring my grief and anger into clay and stone. It was the only place I felt grounded, the only place where my different focus felt like strength rather than deficiency. The journey from heartbroken artist living on ramen noodles to where I stood today had been neither short nor easy. After the initial shockwaves of the breakup subsided, leaving behind the raw ache of grief and betrayal, a quiet determination took root. Michael and his family might have deemed me unsuitable, but I refused to let their judgment define my worth. I found a dilapidated former warehouse space in a fringe neighborhood, miles away from the polished affluence Michael inhabited. The rent was impossibly cheap, the space enormous, drafty, and filled with potential only I seemed to see. Armed with a small inheritance from my grandmother, money I'd fiercely guarded from Michael's casual assumptions about shared finances, and a loan scraped together from believers in my artistic vision, I began transforming the cavernous space. Days were spent working double shifts, gallery assistant by morning, freelance designer by night. Evenings and weekends were consumed by demolition and reconstruction. I learned to plaster walls, install lighting tracks, sand concrete floors until my hands were raw and my muscles screamed in protest. Friends worried I was pushing myself too hard, running from the pain rather than processing it. Maybe they were right, but the physical exhaustion felt preferable to the emotional paralysis. Creating something tangible, something undeniably mine, became my therapy. Slowly, painstakingly, the Crucible Collective took shape. Not just my personal studio, but a shared workspace and gallery for emerging artists, sculptors, and makers who, like me, felt excluded from the traditional gallery system. It was a space built on collaboration, affordability, and the belief that art belonged everywhere, not just in hushed, intimidating white cubes. The early days were lean. We bartered skills, shared equipment, promoted each other's work. Our openings were less champagne and caviar affairs and more potluck and local brew gatherings, filled with raw energy and genuine community. We weren't part of the established art scene. We were building our own, from the ground up. The work was all-consuming, leaving little room for dwelling on the past. Michael Ashton and the life I'd almost had faded into the background, replaced by the immediate demands of managing artists, curating shows, fixing leaky pipes, and somehow making payroll each month. The city itself became my new environment. Vibrant, gritty, challenging, but welcoming in its indifference to pedigree or connections. Success wasn't measured by social invitations or designer labels, but by the quality of the work produced within our walls, the connections forged, the artists nurtured. It was a different kind of wealth, one built on creativity and community, and it felt infinitely more real than the hollow affluence I'd left behind. Finding genuine support after the implosion of my life with Michael was a slow, cautious process. Trust didn't come easily anymore. My first true ally emerged from the most unexpected place, Mr. Henderson, the elderly, gruff owner of the hardware store down the block from the Crucible Collective. He watched my initial renovation efforts with skepticism, often muttering about artsy types wasting good warehouse space. But when my ancient furnace died midwinter, leaving my studio dangerously cold, he showed up unannounced with 3 industrial space heaters and refused any payment beyond a cup of strong coffee. Nobody should freeze for their art, he grumbled, before launching into an impromptu lecture on boiler maintenance. Over time, Mr. Henderson became a fixture, dispensing pragmatic advice on everything from negotiating with suppliers to fixing faulty wiring, always gruffly, always precisely when needed. His belief in my practical ability to build something, not just sculpt it, was a quiet but powerful validation. Then there was Lena Petrova, a renowned sculptor whose work I'd admired for years. She stumbled into the Crucible during one of our chaotic early openings, initially dismissive of our rough-around-the-edges setup. But something about the raw talent on display, the palpable energy of artists working without pretense, intrigued her. She started visiting regularly, offering blunt critiques that were simultaneously devastating and invaluable. She saw potential in my own work, pushing me to move beyond the small, safe pieces I'd been creating towards larger, more ambitious sculptures that reflected the scale of my own transformation. "Stop sculpting your heartbreak, child," she commanded one afternoon, studying a half-finished piece. "Sculpt your strength." Lena became my artistic mentor, her demanding standards forcing me to grow, her belief in my talent rekindling a part of myself I thought Michael's rejection had extinguished. My community grew organically. The other artists at the Crucible, the local business owners who supported our events, the patrons who genuinely loved the unpretentious atmosphere we cultivated. We were a motley crew, united by a shared passion and a rejection of the exclusive, often intimidating traditional art world. This network became my chosen family, offering support, collaboration, and brutally honest feedback, a stark contrast to the conditional acceptance and subtle judgments of Michael's circle. They celebrated my small victories, helped me navigate setbacks, and never once made me feel like I didn't belong. It was within this nurturing ecosystem, so different from the rarefied air Michael breathed, that I finally began to trust again. Not just others, but myself. The transformation from struggling artist to successful gallery director and sculptor wasn't overnight. It was a gradual accretion of small wins, hard lessons, and relentless work. I learned business skills on the fly: marketing, accounting, grant writing, personnel management. I honed my artistic voice under Lena's demanding mentorship, my sculptures growing bolder, more confident, reflecting the internal shifts taking place. I discovered a surprising knack for curation, for seeing the potential in other artists' work and creating shows that resonated with our growing audience. The Crucible Collective gained a reputation not just as a gallery, but as an incubator for raw talent, a vital part of the city's alternative art scene. We started attracting attention beyond our neighborhood, positive reviews in local papers, then mentions in national art blogs. Collectors began seeking out work by Crucible artists. We secured grants, expanded our workshop spaces, and even launched a modest residency program. My own sculptures began selling consistently, first smaller pieces, then larger commissions. One particularly significant commission came from the city itself, a large-scale public art installation for a newly renovated park. The project was challenging, demanding new techniques, and a scale I'd never attempted before. Doubts gnawed at me, echoing Michael's dismissive assessment of my abilities. Could I really pull this off? Lena, ever the pragmatist, scoffed at my hesitation. "Of course you can," she stated flatly. "Stop thinking like the girlfriend of some mediocre suit and start acting like the artist you are." Her words were the jolt I needed. I poured myself into the project, collaborating with engineers and fabricators, pushing my creative boundaries. The unveiling ceremony 6 months later was a triumph. Seeing my work stand tall and proud against the city skyline, knowing it would be part of the public landscape for years to come, felt like a profound validation, far more meaningful than any acceptance Michael or his family could have offered. Financially, things stabilized, then improved. I moved out of Chloe's spare room and into a bright loft apartment above the Crucible, filling it with my own art and books. I was independent, respected in my field, surrounded by a supportive community, building a life on my own terms. The pain of Michael's betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence and a deep gratitude for the unexpected path my life had taken. I was no longer defined by who I wasn't in his world. I was defined by who I was in mine. Life settled into a fulfilling rhythm, the past receding like a distant shoreline. The Crucible thrived, my own artistic career gained momentum, and the community we'd built became my anchor. Then came the email forwarded by my gallery assistant, an obituary notification from a legal firm I didn't recognize. Michael Ashton, dead at 38, sudden heart attack. The news hit me with unexpected force, a confusing mix of shock, residual sadness, and a strange sense of detachment. He was a ghost from another life, yet the news momentarily bridged the chasm between then and now. Condolences and requests for shared memories trickled in from mutual acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. I responded politely but briefly, unsure how to navigate the complex terrain of mourning someone who had profoundly hurt me. Then came the formal invitation to the funeral and reception from Michael's father, delivered via courier, bypassing Beatrice and Chloe entirely. Attached was a handwritten note from Mr. Ashton himself. Amelia, I know things ended poorly, but Michael spoke of you often in recent years, more than you might realize. Your presence would mean a great deal. The request felt genuine, tinged with a grief that transcended the animosity his wife and daughter had shown me. Against my better judgment, perhaps seeking a final, definitive closure, I decided to attend the reception, skipping the formal funeral service itself. I chose my attire carefully, a simple, elegant black dress, professional yet respectful. No attempt to impress, no desire to make a statement, just a quiet presence paying respects to a chapter definitively closed. Walking into that opulent reception room, the scene of so much past humiliation, felt surreal. Beatrice and Chloe were holding court, accepting condolences with practiced solemnity. Their eyes flickered over me with surprise, then dismissal, before returning to their performance of grief. I found a quiet corner, observing the familiar faces, the displays of wealth, the undercurrents of social maneuvering that seemed unchanged even by death. The mocking laughter started subtly, confirming my initial hesitation about coming. Chloe's whispers to a group of Michael's friends, Beatrice's condescending glance. It was a painful echo of the past, a reminder of why I had fled this world. I stood my ground, focusing on Mr. Ashton, who looked genuinely broken, accepting condolences near the entrance. He saw me, and his eyes held a flicker of gratitude before Beatrice steered him away. I would offer my condolences privately, then leave. This world was no longer mine. The brief intersection was almost over. Or so I thought. The reception hummed with the low buzz of polite conversation and restrained grief. I nursed a glass of sparkling water, planning my quiet exit, when a distinguished man in a dark suit stepped to the center of the room and cleared his throat. "If I may have your attention," he began, his voice commanding immediate silence. "I am Arthur Vance, Mr. Michael Ashton's personal attorney. Michael left specific instructions regarding a statement he wished to be shared at this gathering." A ripple of anticipation went through the room. Beatrice and Chloe exchanged expectant glances, likely assuming this involved some final business directive or perhaps a sentimental tribute. I braced myself, expecting nothing that concerned me. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles and began reading from a document. He spoke of Michael's recent reflections on his life, his regrets, his desire to make amends for past mistakes. Standard posthumous platitudes, I thought, my attention drifting towards the exit. Then the lawyer paused, looking directly across the room, his gaze finding mine. "Michael was particularly concerned," the lawyer continued, his voice resonating in the sudden stillness, "about ensuring the future security and recognizing the past contributions of one individual." He paused again for dramatic effect. The room held its breath. Beatrice leaned forward slightly, a confident smile playing on her lips. Chloe straightened, adjusting the sleeve of her designer dress. "To Ms. Amelia Reyes," the lawyer read clearly, "Michael Ashton bequeaths the entirety of his personal investment portfolio, the controlling shares of the Ashton Family Trust previously held in his name, and the deed to the property located at 14 Willow Creek Drive." There was a collective gasp. 14 Willow Creek Drive was the Ashton family estate, the sprawling mansion where Beatrice currently resided. My mind struggled to process the words. Investment portfolio? Controlling shares? The house? It made no sense. This had to be a mistake, some cruel, elaborate joke. I looked around, expecting confusion, but saw only stunned, disbelieving faces staring directly at me. Beatrice's face was white with shock, her mouth slightly agape. Chloe looked as if she'd been slapped. Michael's friends, the ones who'd laughed just minutes before, were frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. The lawyer continued, his voice cutting through the silence. "Michael also left a personal letter for Ms. Reyes, outlining his reasons and expressing his profound regret for his past actions." He stepped forward, extending a thick cream envelope towards me. My feet felt rooted to the floor. This couldn't be happening. Why would Michael, the man who cast me aside as unsuitable, leave me not just provided for, but effectively in control of his family's legacy. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief and unspoken questions. All eyes were on me, the woman who didn't belong, the artist girlfriend, the one they'd laughed at just moments ago. The room, once filled with their mocking confidence, was now utterly, devastatingly silent. My hand trembled slightly as I accepted the envelope from Mr. Vance. The weight of it felt symbolic, heavy with unspoken history and unexpected consequences. I didn't open it. Not there. Not under the glare of dozens of stunned, resentful eyes. Beatrice finally found her voice, shrill and disbelieving. "This is preposterous. Arthur, there must be a mistake. Michael would never. Amelia must have manipulated him." The lawyer simply adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Ashton, the will is perfectly valid. Signed by Michael 2 months prior to his passing, witnessed and notarized. He was of sound mind. His instructions were explicit, including the reading of the statement today." Chloe stepped forward, her face contorted with fury. "My brother would turn over in his grave. She probably poisoned him." The accusation hung, ugly and desperate, in the charged air. Mr. Vance cleared his throat pointedly. "The coroner's report confirmed cause of death was a sudden, severe cardiac event, likely related to previously undiagnosed congenital factors. Any implications otherwise are baseless and potentially slanderous." He turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. "Ms. Reyes, perhaps we could step into the library to discuss the practicalities." I nodded numbly, clutching the letter, acutely aware of the hostile glares following me as we exited the main reception room. The library, lined with leather-bound books Michael had never read, felt like a sanctuary. Mr. Vance closed the heavy oak doors behind us. "Michael anticipated their reaction," he said quietly. "He felt a great deal of guilt in his final months, Amelia, about how he treated you, about the pressures he allowed his family to exert. He explained that Michael, facing his own mortality after receiving a stark diagnosis similar to the one that claimed his father young, had begun reassessing his life and choices. He'd started quietly divesting from some of the family's shadier dealings, funneling funds into a personal portfolio, and amending his will, all without his family's knowledge. He saw the life you built, the success you achieved on your own terms after he dismissed you," Mr. Vance continued. "He saw the contrast with the path he was on. He wanted to ensure you were secure, that his family couldn't undermine you further. And perhaps in some way, he wanted to give you the power they had always denied you. Control over the very assets they valued most. The controlling shares in the trust, the house. It effectively makes you Beatrice Ashton's landlord and the majority voice in the family's financial future." The magnitude of it was staggering. Michael hadn't just left me money, he'd left me leverage, power, a final complex act of, what? Atonement? Regret? Revenge against the family whose approval he'd craved, but whose values he ultimately seemed to reject? I finally opened the letter. Michael's familiar handwriting filled the page, but the tone was different, reflective, remorseful. He wrote of his own weaknesses, his fear of defying his family, his regret over prioritizing ambition and appearance over authenticity. "You were the only real thing in my life, Amelia," the letter concluded, and I threw it away because I wasn't strong enough to deserve it. "I can't undo the hurt I caused, but I can try to ensure your future is secure from the influences that corrupted mine. Use this power wisely." I folded the letter, emotions swirling, grief, anger, confusion, and a strange, unexpected flicker of compassion for the man who had caused me so much pain, but had, in the end, offered this extraordinary, complicated gift. When I returned to the reception room with Mr. Vance, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Beatrice and Chloe stood huddled with a few remaining family members, their whispers ceasing as I approached. "I trust Mr. Vance has clarified the situation," I said, my voice calm, devoid of triumph. Beatrice looked at me, her eyes narrowed. "You won't get away with this." I met her gaze evenly. "Get away with what, Beatrice? Accepting the terms of your son's legally executed will?" I paused, letting the reality sink in. "Perhaps we can discuss the future of the Ashton Trust, and your continued residence at 14 Willow Creek Drive at a more appropriate time. My lawyer will be in touch. I turned and walked towards the exit, leaving them speechless in the echoing silence of their disrupted world. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The ghosts of the past had not been exorcised, perhaps, but they had been rearranged. Michael's final act hadn't erased the hurt, but it had offered a profound, if complicated, form of closure. The power he'd given me wasn't about controlling his family. It was about controlling my own narrative, securing the future I had built for myself, brick by painful brick.